All right, let's take a look at the Chicago Bears and see what did they do during the 2018 off season. What did they do in free agency, and what did they do in the draft? But first, let's take a look and see how much cap space did they have to work with. Well, at the beginning of the off season, they had about $40 million in cap space. That is a good amount of money to work with. Certainly not bad. By the beginning of August, they were down to $26 million. That's actually more than probably a good majority of the teams in the NFL. So they definitely still have money that they can carry over to next season, or maybe if another team makes a cut after the preseason and they got a good player they think they can add to fill a hole, they can certainly have money to do that. So the Bears are in a good cap situation. Let's see, what did they do over the off season. First, let's take a look at some guys that I thought were possible cuts, guys that could increase that cap space from the $40 million they had to, who knows, much more than that, depending on who they decided was worth letting go. The first guy I thought was at risk of getting cut was Mike Glennon. You can see that last offseason he received a 3-year, $45 million deal with $18.5 million guaranteed. As you can also see, that proved to not be a good deal. So he'll still get paid $2.5 million in 2018. He got $16 million last year. He'll get another $2.5 million this year. But they did save $11.5 million by cutting him and not bringing him back. So obviously that proved to be a mistake by the Bears. It's interesting when you look at his numbers. That rookie season, or the first year he played, rather, in 2013, he had pretty decent numbers. 2,600 yards, 19 touchdowns, 9 interceptions, under 60% completion, 59%, but not bad. Pretty good for a guy, first year playing. The next year in Tampa, he had 1,400 yards in 6 games, 10 touchdowns, and 6 interceptions. Completion percentage dropped a little further. So also not bad, but not good. Then, of course, Jameis Winston came in. And so he's out in terms of Mike Glennon as the starter. Next time Mike Glennon saw the field was 2016. Played in 2 games. Actually had 90% completion percentage. 10 of 11. It's pretty solid. 1 touchdown. I mean, those are good numbers for a very small sample size. So the Bears go, okay, look, we'll give this guy, $18.5 million guaranteed. I guess you had the cap space. It was worth taking a gamble on, but the gamble didn't pay off. So they cut Mike Glennon and they moved on, and Glennon is going to be in Arizona. And he got a 2-year, $8 million deal. But it'll be interesting to see if he makes the roster too, because they have Sam Bradford and also Josh Rosen, I believe. So will Mike Glennon even make the roster? At wide receiver, Marcus Wheaton was another guy that I thought was at risk of being cut. He was in the final year of a 2-year deal. The Bears saved $5 million. You can see he'd had a huge season in 2015, also a really solid season in 2014. But the last couple of years, he's had some injuries. Last year, he had a groin tear, missed 5 games. The year before that, he missed most of the season, had a shoulder injury. So he's only had 51 yards each of the last 2 seasons. So it just didn't make sense in the Bears' eyes to bring him back and see, hey, can this guy finally stay healthy again and put up big numbers? So they cut him rather than pay him $5 million. The Eagles snatched him up for $880,000. If he could have a big season like he did with Pittsburgh a couple of years, that'll be a heck of a deal. But obviously, the Steelers have some decent, the Eagles rather have some decent receivers already. So it's hard to say what kind of role will he have there in Philadelphia. Deion Sims was a free agent. He's not a free agent, but was a guy that I thought might get cut because he's set to get paid at least $5.3 million next year. Actually, more than that, and $4 million of his salary was going to guarantee, or did guarantee, on March 16th. So, I made this list before the preseason began, before the offseason began. And so that was a guy that I said, okay, they might cut him before his salary, $4 million guarantees. They would save $5.3 million if they did, but they decided to hold on to him. He's a guy that only averages about 200 receiving yards per season. But they're going to go ahead and it seems like bring him back. You'd have to assume so, given that, so much of his salary is already guaranteed. Josh Sitton is another guy that was a guy I thought might get cut. And it wasn't because he played poorly. He wasn't bad. But the last year of his deal was a club option. So they could cut him and save $7.9 million. And sure enough, they decided to let Josh Sitton go. So, that'll be interesting to watch. How does he do in Miami? Miami snatched him up, gave him 2 years, $15 million. So he didn't have to take a huge pay cut, essentially. He moved from the Bears roster to the Miami roster, but making similar levels of money. It'll be very interesting to see what kind of year does Josh Sitton have there in Miami, because the Bears decided that they had enough guys on the roster, on the interior, that they just didn't need to pay him that much. On defense, Pernell McPhee was a guy that I thought might get cut. 29 years old, saved $6.5 million by letting him go. You can see his numbers dropped off quite a bit. He had that big year rushing the passer with Baltimore in that contract year. Had 7.5 sacks. The Bears brought him over. He did really well his first season. 53 tackles, 6 sacks, not bad. And then the last couple of years, he's had some injuries. Had a knee injury in 2016 that caused him to miss almost half the season. Had a shoulder injury this past season, missed a few games. But you can see those numbers really dropping off. So the fact that the Bears were able to save $6.5 million made a lot of sense for a guy who's 29 years old. So Pernell McPhee, he signed a 1-year deal with the Redskins, and he'll get paid $1.8 million. So he made a lot less, or he will make a lot less than he would have if he had been able to hang on with the Bears. Willie Young, another linebacker that I thought was at risk of being cut. Why? Well, he's 33 years old, and he only played in 4 games last year. Tore his tricep muscle, and you can see, that really killed his numbers. His tackles went from 38 down to 7. The sacks went down from 7.5 to 2. Now, once again, if he'd played in a full season, perhaps, his sack numbers would have been good. But can you depend on a 33-year-old linebacker to stay healthy? The Bears decided it wasn't worth the risk, and they were able to save $3.6 million by letting him go. And it doesn't seem like another team has decided to pick him up and bring him in. So, that says something, I think. Gerald Freeman is another guy that I thought was at risk of getting cut. So actually, with other teams, I had a less successful rate of predicting the guys that might get cut, but with the Bears, I did pretty well. You can see he'd averaged over 100 tackles per year for the last several, 5 seasons, basically. Really good numbers for an inside linebacker. In 2013, he had 5.5 sacks as a middle linebacker. And then the sack numbers completely drop off. Even by 2016, he didn't have any sacks. But he was still able to defend some passes, get the tackles for a loss. Last season, he only played in 1 game before suffering a torn pectoral muscle. And but this is really the bigger deal, to be honest with you. Maybe, I don't know. It's all a big deal. He's 32 years old, and he's facing a 10-game suspension if another team signs him due to repeated PED violations, performance-enhancing drugs. So for a guy who has missed, 3 or 4 games the last several seasons, missed almost all of last season with, injuries, whether it be a pectoral muscle, concussion, and then you got this PED suspension, it was a no-brainer for the Bears to say, look, we're gonna let you go. Okay? So they were able to save $3.5 million and open up a spot on the roster for somebody who hopefully doesn't use PEDs. Now, offensive unrestricted free agents. Who are the guys on offense that could have easily signed with any other team? Kendall Wright is one of the bigger names. You can see here he played on a 1-year, $2 million deal last year with the Bears. To me, I can get that. Okay, so the couple years before his last 2 years in Tennessee, he missed 5 or 6 games each year. He had 400 yards. All right, so you give him $2 million. What really surprises me is that last year he put up great numbers with the Bears, 600 yards receiving on 59 catches. That's really not bad at all, but he only signed a 1-year, $1 million deal with the Vikings. It's amazing, especially considering that Joshua Bellamy was also a free agent. He only had 376 yards on 24 catches. Now, what that says to me is that his average yards per catch was better. He's more of a deep threat maybe than Kendall Wright. You can see here, Kendall Wright had more about around 10, 11 yards a catch, whatever. But Joshua Bellamy had closer to, more than 15 yards a catch, but still, Bellamy gets 1 year, $1.9 million. He's going to be 29 years old too. So very, very interesting. Bears decided to let Kendall Wright go, and they brought in Bellamy for 1 year and $1.9 million. Very curious about that. At another wide receiver that was a free agent was Dontrell Inman. He had a few good games after getting traded over from the Chargers. You can see he had 8 games with the Bears and 334 yards. Had a really good season in 2016 when the Chargers were still in San Diego, but his production fell off this season quite a bit when they moved to LA, and they decided to move him. So I don't know. He puts up pretty decent numbers when he's healthy. He played on a 1-year, $1.6 million deal, but so far the Bears haven't elected to bring him back, nor has anyone else. At tight end, Zach Miller was a free agent. Wow. He had that horrific leg injury where he dislocated his knee and needed surgery to repair an artery. Some people said it was a life-threatening injury. It was certainly career-threatening. He could have had his leg amputated. Very, very, very scary. I thought for sure he was done. But the Bears, they did a really nice thing. It was a very classy move, I think, by the Bears. They signed him to like a minimum salary 1-year deal, and then immediately put him on the players unable to perform list. So, he's still a Bear. He's been a Bear for a long time. And it was a classy move, considering the nature of that injury. At running back, Benny Cunningham was the number 3 back last season. He's primarily a threat catching it out of the backfield, but the Bears decided to go ahead and bring him back. Let's look at the defensive unrestricted free agents. Kyle Fuller was probably the biggest name, was the best corner on the roster this past season for the Bears, had the best season of his career. He was a first-round pick, and the Bears had declined his 5th-year option, but because he had such a good year, they decided they needed to keep him, so they gave him a 4-year, $56 million deal. I think it'd be very interesting to compare what the 5th-year option for a cornerback was this season. Probably something comparable, so 4 years, $56 million, that's what, $14 million a year, is right around there. It might have been actually less than that. But they just couldn't count on the fact that he was going to have that kind of season when they had to choose whether to pick up his 5th-year option or not. So he got $56 million and $29 million guaranteed. Kyle Fuller will be back with the Bears. Christian Jones, another unrestricted free agent defensive player, solid backup linebacker, played last season on a 1-year, $1.5 million deal, was an undrafted player out of Florida State. And Detroit signed him away, gave him 2 years and $6.35 million. And I guess the Bears just decided they didn't need him for that much. But I'm a big Christian Jones fan, and he had 90 tackles last season, had a couple sacks. I think he's a solid player. I really, really do. I think the Bears might miss him. It's certainly from a depth perspective. On a defensive end, Mitch Unrein, they got great, in my opinion, great value out of him. Probably had the best year, maybe, of his career. One of the best years of his career, certainly. He was at 31 years old, nonetheless. He missed some games with a knee injury, but he was playing on a 2-year deal worth $1.1 million per year, and he got 32 tackles and 2.5 sacks. Solid. At defensive end, 32 tackles, 2.5 sacks in a 3-4 system. Solid. So Tampa signed him for 3 years and $10.5 million. But the way Tampa does contracts, they don't really give usually any signing bonus. And so it's kind of like each year you have to earn your keep, and they can cut you without any dead money. So they're really like kind of 1-year team option deals or whatever. But they signed a 31-year-old defensive end, and we'll see how that pans out. Tampa doesn't have a great record in free agency. John Jenkins, a defensive tackle, did not play much, but provided some depth. He will be 29. Last year he received $800,000, and the Bears decided to bring him back and give him a little baby raise, and he'll get paid $880,000. So John Jenkins will be back at defensive tackle. At linebacker, Sam Acho will be back as well. He was a reliable backup linebacker. He'll be 30 at the beginning of the season. Last year he played on an $855,000 deal, 1-year deal, but played well enough that the Bears gave him 2 years and $5.5 million. So, one of the questions is, will Sam Acho win that spot, that starting outside linebacker spot? It certainly seems like they paid him expecting that he could win it. So that is one of the questions, is will he win one of those outside linebacker spots? Another linebacker that was a free agent was Lamar Houston. He played in 5 games and had 4 sacks, but he's had some injuries. So much so that he's only played in 12 games the last 2 years. Even tore his ACL in 2016. He's tore both his ACLs in his career. So, for a 31-year-old guy who's had 2 ACL tears, and played in 12 games in 2 years, seems like teams are shying away from him. At cornerback, we mentioned Kyle Fuller was a free agent, but Prince Amukamara was also a free agent. Was good but not great, but played well. Played on a 1-year, $7 million deal. And the Bears said, hey, all right, we'll give you 3 years and $27 million to come back with $18 million guarantee. So it's good for Amukamara. Hopefully good for the Bears. We'll see. But they're going to return most of their starting cornerbacks from last year. Speaking of cornerbacks from last year, Sherrick McManus will also be back. He didn't play as much on defense, but was a very valuable special teams contributor. And the Bears rewarded him with a 2-year, $3.5 million deal. It's quite a hefty deal. But, special teams are important. Now let's summarize all of the major changes for the Bears. Mike Glennon out as the backup QB there in Chicago. Chase Daniel will be in. At wide receiver, a whole crew out almost. Kendall Wright gone. Dontrell Inman gone. Dante Thompson gone. Trey McBride gone. Marcus Wheaton gone. Cameron Meredith gone. All of these guys gone. Okay? Dante Thompson had 125 yards in 5 games before being traded, I believe, to Buffalo. McBride had 144 yards in 8 games. Meredith had a huge 2016 season, but tore his ACL last year. All those guys are gone. Who are they going to bring in to replace all those guys? Well, they brought in Allen Robinson. That will be interesting. We'll talk about his numbers in a minute. They gave him 3 years and $42 million. If he's able to bounce back from his ACL injury, then that'll be a good deal. But, it's risky to sign a guy who hasn't come back yet from an ACL tear to a 3-year, $42 million deal. Benny Fowler, he's brought in, had 350 yards and 3 touchdowns last year. Had never had really big numbers before that. But they brought in Benny Fowler. Taylor Gabriel. They gave Taylor Gabriel 4 years and $26 million with 14 guaranteed. Wow, I was really, really surprised at that. Look, I like Taylor Gabriel. He played with the Falcons. I'm a Falcons fan. But that's a lot of money for a, what is he, like 5'9" or something? For a very, he's fast. I get it. He can stretch the field. But his numbers really dropped last year without Kyle Shanahan. So, it really depends on how you use him. And last year, Sarkisian didn't seem to use him very well, and he disappeared. So, we'll see. That's one that I'm not sure about. Anthony, I like the Allen Robinson signing. I do. It's a risky move, but I like it. But the Taylor Gabriel, we'll have to see. I hope I'm wrong. I like Taylor Gabriel. No disrespect to Taylor Gabriel. I'm a Taylor Gabriel fan, but I don't know if he's going to prove to be worth 4 years, $26 million, and 14 guaranteed. I hope I'm wrong. Anthony Miller, Bears drafted him in the 2nd round, and they also brought in some guys for depth like Marlon Brown, DeMarcus Ayers, and then Javon Wims, who they drafted in the 7th round. Let's look at some of these guys' numbers. So these 2 guys are out. Kendall Wright had 600 yards receiving. That's a lot of production they need to replace. Dontrell Inman had 334 yards in 8 games. That's quite a bit of production too. There's Marcus Wheaton's numbers. Now let's look at Taylor Gabriel. Had a really good year in 2016, like I mentioned, with the Falcons. 579 yards and 6 touchdowns. He's a quick little booger, I'll tell you. He has got some speed on him. I think they called him Hot Wheels or something. He's very, very fast. But then you can see last year, his yards, I mean, he had a similar number of catches, actually, but then the yards dropped tremendously. Before, it's just I think teams had no idea what to expect. How they throw these screen passes and then boom, he'd be gone for like 70 yards on a screen pass. So I think teams began to game plan for him. It'll be interesting to see how that works out. Here's Allen Robinson's numbers. You can see, bam, 1,400 yards in 2015 and 14 touchdowns. But even in 2016, he played in all 16 games, but those numbers started to drop down back to earth, 883 yards and 6 touchdowns. And then last year, like on his first catch, he tore that ACL. So I like the move. I do. I just don't know. You know, I do. I like the move. I think he'll bounce back. I think it's a good move by the Bears, but it's a risk. There's Marlon Brown's numbers, 112 yards. You know, not huge. He had in 2013, and that's in 2015. He didn't have any catches the last 2 seasons. So that's probably not going to get it done. And then DeMarcus Ayers, 53 yards on 6 catches in 2 seasons. These are just depth guys they're given a chance to. At tight end, I mentioned Zach Miller out. He had at least 400 yards in 2015 and 2016, but had 236 yards in 8 games before that gruesome injury. The Bears brought in Trey Burton. That'll be interesting too, you know. He looked really good backing up Ertz there in Philadelphia. Had 5 touchdowns, 248 yards. It's a big contract though. 4 years, $32 million, $18 million guaranteed. It's a big contract. We'll see. That's another one that I'm not. Trey Burton he has a lot of talent, a lot of skill. I'd like to think it's going to work out. But he's never put up like humongous numbers. But he's also never been a number 1 starting tight end before. So we'll have to see. He was behind Selleck, and then he's behind Ertz, and so it should be good. Should be good for the Bears. At tackle, Tom Compton was the swing tackle. He's out. Earl Watford is in. He played actually mostly at right guard last season for Arizona. And Matt McCants is in. At guard, Josh Sitton is out. And James Daniels is in, but the Bears seem to indicate that they're going to play James Daniel at center, but Cody Whitehair is already at center. So then the question is, will they move Cody Whitehair to guard, or will James Daniel be the number 2 guy? That's the thing to really look at this year for the Bears. You know, Kyle Long will probably be at right guard. Who's going to play left guard? Will it be Cody Whitehair? Will it be James Daniels? Will it be Eric Kush? You will have to see. On defensive end, Mitch Unrein is gone. That's a pretty significant loss. They brought in Nick Williams, who's the reserve player, and Bilal Nichols, who was drafted in the 5th round. At linebacker, a whole sweeping change. Pernell McPhee out. Willie Young out. 2 outside linebackers. You can see their sack numbers were starting to drop. Jarrell Freeman out. Christian Jones out. 2 inside linebackers. And then Lamar Houston. So there's a huge turnover in their linebacker core. Roquan Smith is in. They drafted him in the 1st round. I think in the long run, that is going to... Well, to be honest with you, even in the short run, you know, I think he'll be able to provide more than Gerald Freeman did last year. He'd be somewhere, maybe, if they're lucky, he'll be somewhere around Christian Jones in his rookie year. In the long term, I think it's a great choice. Aaron Lynch will be in at outside linebacker. If he performs to his peak at his best, that'll be a great signing. We'll talk about him again in a minute. There's also Kylie Fitz, and then Joel Iebunewe. I love that name, Iebunewe, and he was a 4th round pick for Chicago. So there's Gerald Freeman's numbers. Only 1 game last year, 10 tackles, so he wasn't able to do much. But, I mean, that's 100-plus tackle a year guy prior to that at inside linebacker. And then Christian Jones, 90 tackles last year. It's a lot of production to replace. Here's Aaron Lynch's numbers. You can see his first 2 years in San Francisco. Bam, 6-plus sacks a year. Great second year for him. 38 tackles, 7 tackles for a loss. But really struggled with some injuries. Had a 4-game drug suspension in 2016, plus a high ankle sprain. Missed 9 games. Last year he had a calf injury. Very disappointing end to his rookie contract. But the Bears said, hey, look, you got a lot of potential, so we're going to give you 1 year and $4 million to try to prove yourself. I'm rooting for Aaron Lynch. You know, actually, Aaron Lynch left Notre Dame and went, and I'm a huge Notre Dame fan, and went to USF. But I like Aaron Lynch. He was a really talented player and a little immature, but I'd love to see him right the ship in Chicago. Finally, at safety, Quentin Demps and Chris Przinski both out. Demps fractured his forearm and missed most of the season last year. He started in 2016 for the Texans and had 6 interceptions, but he's going to be 33 years old next year. So he won't be back with the Bears, nor will Chris Przinski, who had been primarily a backup. So overall, if you look at the Bears and you say, where on their roster did they improve? Well, it's hard to say they improved at linebacker. I'm talking in the short run. Not in the long run, in the short run. It's hard for me to look at it and go, yeah, next year they're going to be better at linebacker than they were the year before in terms of their roster improvements. Did the guys they bring in, are they going to be better than the guys that are leaving? But I don't think there's going to be a huge drop-off. I don't, because those guys were all kind of declining guys who are, all 30-plus. Except for Christian Jones. So overall, I'd say not a huge drop-off there at linebacker. I don't think they upgraded on the defensive line. The offensive line, I think the Bears have really held steady on most of except for maybe wide receiver. I do think they've improved at wide receiver from last season, but only marginally. So, a lot will depend on how healthy. The Bears had a lot of injuries last year. So if they can stay healthy, that will be the biggest difference maker from this year from last year. But I just don't see this team being a team that significantly upgraded. I see it as a team that held steady. And if they hold steady and stay healthy, they'll be a lot better than they were last season. But is that going to be enough to make the playoffs? I don't think so. I mean, when you look at Minnesota's roster, there's no way the Bears win that division. No way, in my opinion. And there's no way, they could, if they had a magical season, they can make the playoffs. They can win a wild card spot. But I don't see this Bear team finishing above 500. That's kind of the peak as I see it. The best case scenario is 500. But they're building a solid foundation. They're a team that I think in 2019 or 2020 could, if they continue to draft well, could start to compete, get back to the playoffs, and then have a chance. If you like this video, please click subscribe because we are going to have some great videos coming up in the future. We're going to break down the roster of all 32 teams, and then each week we're going to preview the upcoming week's games as well as review the previous week's games. So make sure you click subscribe because we are going to have some of the best coverage of the NFL on YouTube. Thank you so much.